preference to keep your camera off, that's totally fine. And some background before we begin. So for those of you who are new to the Starfish Canada's work, we are a nonprofit organization that empowers youth voices through our national journal and amplifies change through programming and education. The Top 25 program is an embodiment of passion and forward thinking. So every year we award 25 young environmental leaders with not only physical awards for their dedication in environmentalism, but we also provide them with opportunities to grow. And this is one of those opportunities. Another cool opportunity that we provide our top 25 winners is the Speakers Bureau. So if you're interested in booking one of our speakers to speak in a panel like today, or as a keynote speaker, take a look at our extensive list of speakers and their topics of interest on our website. Our six-part panel series has featured our 2024 top 25 winners, and it's covered various topics, including things like sustainability, reconciliation, colonialism, policy change, and so much more. And we're so happy to have you join us today. And before we get started on the panel and introducing all our amazing panelists for today, I wanted to acknowledge that the Starfish Canada's work stretches across the homes of many treaties, unceded and unsurrendered Indigenous, Métis, and Inuit communities in what is known as colonially as Canada. As for me, I'm calling in today from the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, and it includes the Katzie, Kwantlen, and Semiahmoo First Nations, also known as BC. So welcome everyone to today's session called Policy Change and Moving Forward. And for today, our speakers will be speaking in the language of their choice, so either English or French. So please feel free to set up closed captioning with your preferred language. And Aish is going to be sharing the instructions of how to do that in the chat right now.
Sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties, but it will be in the chat momentarily.
No worries. Thank you so much, Aish. And as we're going through the panel session, please also feel free to engage and react using emojis in Zoom as we go along, and leave your questions or comments in the chat as we go along as well. So first on our panel today is Alex Martin. So Alex is a researcher at the University of Toronto, where he's completed his MSc in geography with collaborative specialization in environmental studies, researching urban greening and urban forest management. Alex is passionate about community engagement, environmental justice, and making research accessible to the public. Alex has published multiple articles on environmental inequities in Canada and actively supports Indigenous-led urban forestry initiatives through his volunteer work with environmental organizations. So thank you so much, Alex, for joining us and welcome. Our next panelist today is Elena Cox. So Elena is a Mi'kmaq youth leader and sustainability advocate with experience in environmental policy, governance, and reconciliation work through collaborations with governments, institutions, and organizations. Elena's contributed to national and international environmental targets and published work on equity and inclusion in decision-making processes. Holding a Master of Sustainability Management, Elena's committed to advancing climate action and reconciliation by promoting collaboration, traditional knowledge, and the inclusion of underrepresented groups. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us, Elena. Next, we have Abhi Mishra. So Abhi is the co-founder and operations director of Mosa Technologies, which is a sustainable home decor brand that upcycles glass waste into eco-friendly products and promotes sustainability through youth workshops. He's previously served as the VP of Finance at the AMS of UBC, managing a 30 million budget and securing 900K in funding while leading campus-wide green initiatives. Inspired by his roots in Udaipur, India, Abhi remains dedicated to environmental action and empowering communities to embrace sustainable living. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us as well, Abhi. Our last panelist is Chetan Jessel. So, Chetan is a University of Calgary medical student and a Canadian Medical Hall of Famer whose advocacy focuses on healthcare access, environmental sustainability, and educational equity. He's secured over 1.3 million in funding for initiatives supporting Indigenous education, decolonizing healthcare, and open educational resources. Also, as Director of Government Affairs for the Canadian Federation of Medical Students, he's played a key role in expanding access to contraception through Canada's National Pharmacare Plan and led national efforts addressing food insecurity. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us as well, Chetan. And yep, I'm so excited that you're all here and sharing your thoughts on today's topic. So we'll jump right in. What we'll do is we're going to share our main questions for the panelists in the chat, and I'll also read them out. And then at the end, if we have time, we're going to be opening up the floor to any questions from the audience. So I invite you all to sit back and take in what these youth leaders have to say for today. And also, if any questions or comments come up, please feel free to use the chat and we'll get to those questions at the end. So for the first question, I'll jump right in. How can we hold governments and corporations accountable for their environmental impact, especially when it comes to climate justice? So I'll open up the floor if anyone would like to get us started.
Sure, I don't mind starting. Thank you so much for the warm introductions, and I'm really excited to be here today. I have kind of a bold statement on this question. I think that governments and corporations really only act under consistent scrutiny. The real product that they're selling isn't, soda or cereal or whatever. It's the image of what an average consumer is. And I think that we need to change that narrative with collective oversight from unions, land defenders, environmental advocates, and frontline communities all working together. I think it's crucial to keep powerful actors accountable in order to sustain the pressure through different campaigns, legal challenges, and mobilizing the public. And I really think that we need to hold them accountable, not just to voluntary pledges, because those aren't enough, but we need stronger enforcement and accountability mechanisms, such as transparent accountability and reporting, and then holding them responsible when they fail to meet these certain standards. And I think that applies to both environmental welfare and the equity of underrepresented communities.
Yeah, I can go next. I agree with Elena to quite an extent. I think like it's very important for us to hold, large governments or corporations to account. And one of the ways, apart from everything that Elena just mentioned, that we could do is actually try and find local sources for where we are and where in any local organization that we can join. Because at the end of the day, like a government is looking for your vote, a corporation is looking for your wallet, and those are probably two of the most important things that you have in your pocket to try and keep them accountable. And when small groups of community come together, they can actually have a larger impact, more bigger than what people actually imagine it to be. I mean, there was this very famous example of what Greenpeace was able to do with all of its members against fast food companies, where they made up an entire campaign with the hopes to end plastic straws in all of their restaurants. And through campaigns like this, which are all grassroots campaigns, it was not the Greenpeace's organization's idea, it was just one of their volunteers' idea that really took off steam, and it resulted, I think, either in the UK or somewhere else in Europe, McDonald's and other fast food companies completely eliminating plastic straws from their supply chain altogether. So it's like one small example of what, when individuals, when they do come together, what they can do. And it's pretty important for us that we actually do look for those sources to try and make sure that our governments and corporations are held to account.
I can jump in after these both. Again, can't disagree with a single word that's been said. I just want to say that like being in the healthcare system, you can clearly see how environmental harms translate to different negative health outcomes. Things like high rates of asthma, things like heat-related illnesses that again, genuinely impact people's lives here and now today. So this question is so important because it's ultimately governments that are creating the policies that corporations end up following that lead to that ultimately impact us kind of downstream in a certain way. The best way that I've ever found, or the best campaigns I've ever seen, always start at that grassroots level. It's always people coming together, talking about issues, wanting to be involved, thinking about the things that matter to them the most, and organizing. There's so many different organizations that currently exist advocating to government, advocating against, some of the harm that corporations are doing to the environment. And, joining them, I think, is always a very, very successful way at speaking with governments and making your voice heard. The other thing I'd mention is that a lot of policy at a governmental level isn't necessarily set by parliamentarians themselves, like MPs or MLAs. A lot of it is set by parties and party mandates. There's a significant role, and I think it's a significantly, I don't know, unexploited role in advocating in party elections when those occur. I know those aren't necessarily like, all Canadians get to sit down and vote for those, but, become a member of a political party or two or three or every single one of them and make your voices heard at their, national provincial caucuses, and you'll see a lot of movement.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. I certainly think that both voter demographics and voter turnout and market response are important influencing how governments and corporations can be held accountable. Uh, I think that when we talk about kind of at least the corporate side, in our current kind of Canadian context, we have the formal policies that come in from government, which then requires voters to make sure that governments are putting in the regulations that then go back to the corporations, but also those informal routes through both what we purchase, but then also what standards we hold corporations to, either informal standards like uh, being out in the community, being quite vocal, supporting their local neighborhoods, but also more formal standards that are created through NGOs, in which case buyers can purchase according to a set stamp or criteria, like Elena talked about, where we're able to actually come back and verify that those corporations are doing what they said and not simply greenwashing. Uh, One other thing that I'll add on kind of the government side, and this is a little bit more large scale, big idea, is that we're at a point now where climate change has become too serious and too urgent an issue to continue to be as politically divisive as it is. And that one thing that we kind of ought to demand of government is this transition away from parties that are either in agreement or disagreement with climate action and climate response. Um, Policy debates are quite healthy. Different regulational approaches, different incentive programs are good and the foundations of a good democracy. We ought to encourage governments to be continuously thinking about climate change and prioritizing other indices in addition to GDP, where we can capture the potential harms that are occurring right now and certainly in the future under a changing climate. And part of that comes back to that environmental impact, especially climate justice, is not just a climate justice in the here and now, but also long-term future generations and the world that we're leaving to them. So understanding it in both the spatial context of who is most impacted disproportionately now, but then the impacts that we're leaving towards the future. That's another form of climate injustice that often goes undiscussed. So I'll leave it with that.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you all so much for adding your thoughts there. And I see Elena's also added an extra note about it's the financial evaluation of ecosystem services that aren't seen like natural disasters and healthcare impacts. Yeah, really well said. I love how all of you kind of touched on how corporations and governments also, need to work together. Things that you mentioned, Alex, about regulation and adding standards, and that's just going to help people on the ground as well. And something Abhi, you and Chetan both really touched on is the kind of grassroots impact and the fact that individuals themselves have this power to, actually influence policy change. So Building on that thought, my next question for you all is, how are some ways you suggest that people get involved in climate policy action? I'll open up the floor to anyone to get started.
Well, I don't like awkward silences, so I'll always just jump right in. But as someone that works with a lot of Indigenous youth and inspiring to get more involved in climate policy action and environmental welfare, one thing that I always say is that you don't need a fancy degree or a career in politics, although, you could if you want to go there. But it's really just about commitment, community, and a willingness to speak up. And my first thing I would say is definitely learn and become more educated on these issues, especially from a local level. This can be just learning from social media platforms, documentaries, doing your own research, or joining conversations such as this one in order to learn more because knowledge is power and power can influence change. So I would utilize what you've learned to influence decision making through voting for appropriate candidates and environmental justice organizations and climate organizations, joining those and adding your voice. You can even go further by attending climate strikes, town halls, or doing letter writing campaigns to increase that pressure on decision makers that we were talking about in the first question.
Yeah, I'd agree with Elena again. I think like it is important for people to first understand what in climate policy do they want to contribute to, because it's still a very broad topic and there are multiple different aspects that people can touch on. So first try and figure out where exactly do you think you can contribute the most. And once you've kind of gotten a good understanding of what that is, then start local. So whether if that means if you're in university, go look for a club or your student associations who are doing something about this or not. Maybe you could be the one who could start that. If you're, looking to expand that, maybe you could join local nonprofits. You could write to your MPs or your MLAs, or join, if you're still at the local level, join some city committee that's available, which has got an opening. You can speak with people over there and try and have conversations. Go to maybe a party meeting or two for political party and see if that is an avenue that you want to explore. If that's the path you want to take. But yeah, like you don't need a fancy degree in politics or I don't know, public policy or sustainability to actually make a change. It begins with understanding what is the change that you want to make and whether you've got enough determination and grit to stick through with it and actually make it work.
I'll follow up on that. I think starting local is a really good uh, way to get going and get involved for two reasons. There's a lot of opportunities at the municipal level and local level. There are those groups that you can join that are local and easy to get your foot in the door. But I think to an extent, it's good to up a build experience in navigating climate policy and climate policy advocacy. Uh, it often benefits to make friends, especially within kind of the government sector, and that's easily done with municipalities. Trying to approach new climate policy conversations, especially when you're discussing it with people who were the ones who put that policy or legislation in place to begin with, uh, is easier done from a place of optimism and friendship than kind of a critique or challenge. And so you'll often see a lot of success at the local level, and it's nice to use that as a foundation to gain experience in kind of the policy arena, and then broaden upwards. I would also agree wholeheartedly that I don't think you need a law degree or a political sciences degree to advance climate policy, whether at the local level or even up to the international level. And in some regards, it's quite helpful to come in with a different viewpoint and to come in with different experiences. And that way you can, stuff's been tried for years, right? We're looking at decades of work in climate policy. Uh, and if you can contribute a new idea, a new approach that hasn't been tried yet, or reinvigorate an approach that has perhaps remained kind of plateaued, that's an opportunity that's really important to see at the local level and advance provincially, nationally, and internationally.
Following up on all the correct things that the other panelists have said, I'm really just echoing that there's so many organizations that maybe you see yourself, fitting in more cleanly, organizations you see yourself not fitting in quite as cleanly. But there's so much work to be done, and these organizations are always looking for excited and motivated people to get involved. For myself, one of the most meaningful things I've done was I was part of the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, which is a really strong organization of, healthcare workers doing this kind of work and kind of pushing forward advocacy against a lot of, measures that are, very negative for the environment. It's easy for somebody with a background like me to join an organization like that, but they're always looking for motivated people. I think more than half of the organization is not made up of physicians. So exactly like Alex was mentioning, exactly like Abhi mentioned, exactly like Elena mentioned, um, get involved.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. Really well said. And Lubaba, you had your hand raised. Would you like to unmute and ask a question?
Yeah, thank you so much everyone for your input. I'll just quickly introduce myself. I'm Lubaba. I work as an analyst at Catalyst, which is a community finance organization. I'm also involved with Young Politicians of Canada, the BC chapter, and we're in the process of making our plans for the year, activism plans, and most people in the club are high school students. So I was wondering if you had any ideas for people like this, like people in the younger age group, to get more active in the community, especially in Vancouver and BC.
I can start. I lived in Vancouver a while ago, and it's nice because it's a very active environment, and there's many people around who are interested in those issues. So you can certainly find community groups to participate and engage with locally. Uh, I think one big thing that comes up quite a bit is I'm paraphrasing from someone's I think it was a New York Times article recently that unlike volunteerism in kind of the legal profession, aspects of the medical profession, there is a very large emphasis on people from environmental backgrounds volunteering their time away, and often it becomes quite a drain. So this is the more kind of like time management side of the volunteering aspect that I think we can lose ourselves in very important initiatives, especially ones that seem so urgent as climate change and so substantive, and making sure that you uh, give time to both yourself in the sense that you have time to go out and do activities uh, and don't get caught up, I would say, in a very extensive policy effort. These are policy changes that can take uh, successive years. Some stuff is quite short and simple, and those are always nice, but long-term strategic policy changes comes over the course of many years and long-term engagement. And so making sure that you also prioritize yourself as part of that volunteerism is quite important. And so when it comes to a board, for example, making sure you kind of have uh, some concept when you're going into that position or volunteering with an organization, what you want to accomplish and what you want to help the organization accomplish is important to making sure that you help kind of protect yourself. Certainly, climate anxiety is a very large concern, and it's an elevated concern now amongst youth as they kind of navigate the impacts of climate change, both visible in what we have now and what's projected into the future. And so making sure to take time for yourself is I think, a very seldomly offered piece of advice to youth coming into this, but it is important.
I guess I have three thoughts about this question. The first would be that, as far as I know, politicians love photo ops, and I'm certain that a lot of politicians in BC and Canada in general would love to speak with, these youth leaders who care about advancing climate policy and advancing climate initiatives. So number one, I think just even cold emailing MPs might be successful, or, friends who that are working with government or otherwise. The second thing I wanted to mention was just that a lot of cities, and I'm like, this has come from my perspective of growing up in Calgary. There was a lot of City of Calgary committees that were looking for like youth advocates or youth members to kind of join and to kind of understand what the pol or the processes of sitting on city committees look like. Maybe something similar looks, or maybe there is something similar in BC. The third thing, and maybe Abhi can talk about this a little bit more, is that there's a lot of organizations once students graduate from high school into universities that do a lot of really, really cool work kind of advancing advocacy. And I know that's personally kind of where, my spark was found. So maybe Abhi can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, when well, with the university, like I'm not too sure about other universities, but I think it is fairly the same across all in BC. They all have these student unions, and a lot of them actually have their own departments or a dedicated team that focuses on sustainability or climate issues. So reaching out to one of them, if you're looking for someone in Vancouver, then UBC's AMS would definitely be a good route to explore. And other than that, like there is Greater Vancouver's Board of Trade, which also does a lot of work when it comes to lobbying with municipal, provincial, and federal government. And they do have different programs and spots that I'm not sure if they're still open or not, but they do have programs for particularly for youth who want to get involved in advocacy or get involved in some sort of a public policy arena. I was part of that a couple years ago, but yeah, I think like those two would probably be a good start.
I would just like to also echo what Alex had said about climate anxiety. I think that just because it's also a high school level group, it's really important to be able to start teaching skills that they will be able to utilize more in the future, such as lobbying, grant writing, things like that. And also just learning more about climate policy, environmental welfare. And I think you learn that from local community and having a more holistic relationship with the land. Not this affects that, but how can we affect each other positively? It's more of the indigenous viewpoint of really connecting with the land and being on the land, showing how to respect it. And I think that just a nice mix between spending time on the land and learning about the land can really help to kind of slowly ease high school students into the world of climate justice because, like Alex said, it can be a lot of anxiety. It can be very thought-provoking, but it's can be, sometimes very difficult when it comes to that. And just being more centered, I think, is a great way to start.
Yeah, thank
I
you so much. Oh, sorry.
I'll also highlight Elena talked about the importance of like learning like policy foundations, stuff like that too. Uh, you see a lot of recommendations and like policy implication sections of papers that come out in Canada that try to push for climate policy at the federal level, perhaps, but they're talking about like a provincial level issue, or they're pushing provincial level policy and what should be a federal issue or municipal. And understanding, I think, building up that kind of knowledge foundation about what climate policy fits in where into Canada's jurisdictions is quite important to making sure that you're penning letters, you're launching initiatives that are focused on kind of the right level of government for that issue. Uh, it helps make sure that your time and effort is pushing towards a implementable change. Sometimes we get caught up in pushing things to the federal level and wanting to talk to MPs in Ottawa about issues that really our city can begin to make the change on, or perhaps our provincial government has jurisdiction. So that knowledge base that Elena talked about is really important to kind of creating a path forward.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm one of the older members, as someone who's graduated recently. So, I want to take the lead on sort of like knowledge mobilization workshops, be it in climate or even just like telling people how to find out who your MP or MPP is. But climate is on the top of my list of agendas. Sometimes I feel like high school students think because they're so young that there's not a lot of action they can take, but I kind of want to change that narrative. And I'd love to connect further on this conversation later as well.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you so much, Lubaba, for that additional question, and then also, everyone jumping in and answering that. I think like the points you've all made are really, really great because these tangible actions that people can take. And Elena, just echoing the point of, connecting with the land and being on the land and learning about it being so important for everyone, and in particular youth who are getting started on this journey. Yeah, I love the tangible actions we can take through university clubs, looking to local groups, and then Alex, you mentioned, and then Chetan as well, like how beyond just looking towards advocacy and lobbying, building those relationships within your community and actually friendships as well, is a great way to just get started and start those policy conversations. So yeah, really, really, really great responses there. I'm going to move on to our third question here, which is how can climate advocates build alliances with frontline and impacted communities to push for inclusive climate policies? So, if anyone would like to go first.
I can go first. I'll touch on it lightly. Uh, a big component, I think we've highlighted this in the questions coming up, is that a like-minded cohort is important to have, and that alliance as you move forward, both for kind of the power of many voices is strong, but also the support that people can give each other within that alliance or that cohort. Certainly, one of the kind of opportunities through that is building up your own skills, but then also kind of propagating the skills of others to the extent that I, for example, am not very inclined towards social media. I don't know how to make a viral TikTok, for example. Other people have those skills and can bring it in, versus my side is kind of towards policy. And so identifying advocates and alliances that complement your skills is quite important to having a diverse and rounded portfolio as you approach these issues.
Again, I feel like I'm just repeating what the person before me has said. Um, But I think there's a certain skill and a certain power with being able to have a sincere conversation with somebody and even being able to just talk. Not in like the typical way of like, oh, hey, how are you doing? How's this? But really getting to the root of different issues. Whether you agree with that person or not, there's a lot of dialogue that I think has been lost between people in different fields because I might think, oh my goodness, I don't know how to talk to a lawyer about climate law. I don't know how to talk to, whoever about whatever. But honestly, just a hint of curiosity and a hint of, genuine, looking for that genuine human connection. I think that can go a long way in building relationships and getting the knowledge you need to actually make that kind of frontline difference and include people in climate conversations.
Yeah, I think like echoing on both their points, it would be if when you're trying to build alliances or like build a community with people, yes, it's important to have people who are, who would complement your skills, and you're able to get people who've got experiences in different fields. And with that, I think going on to the point which I said, like we need to, when we approach people for conversation, it should come genuinely from the point where we're trying to learn and understand somebody's perspective rather than just pushing our own agenda to it. Like, no, this is exactly what I think is right, and rest everything else is wrong. Like if that's the mindset that we go into a conversation with, then we never end up in a position where both of us can come together and collectively solve the problem. Like I'm sure from every perspective, everybody knows climate change is a problem, right? It's not a hoax. It is a real problem. And we all do need to come together to work to try and solve this problem over here. So when we're looking to build alliances, approach it with a certain idea that I'm here in a position to learn. Always go in with the idea of optimism that yes, like this conversation is going to lead to something, or we can truly come and work together. And with that, also be open-minded to what the other person's perspective may be, because who knows, maybe you are able to find a good idea from whatever they're talking about, and that could actually help advance all of our goals together.
As someone that works with a lot of underrepresented communities, which mainly Indigenous communities, I would say that a lot of times when it comes to decisions that impact people environmentally, it usually is on underrepresented groups. And that's why I think it's increasingly important to include them in conversations because they're usually the most impacted. For example, a lot of Indigenous communities, like there's Grassy Narrows here in Ontario. I've spoken with them a few times, and it's just, they've been dealing with mercury poisoning because their water supplies have been tainted for the last few decades based off of mining and forestry. And their voices aren't being heard. They're trying to scream very loudly and try to get their rights corrected and establish an Indigenous protected conserved area. And then they just constantly get shut down by provincial, federal governments, even though they've already admitted they're wrong. And it's about building alliances with those people that are most affected so that they can, one, have justice, two, they're experiencing it, so they have a very unique situation to help shape climate environmental policy because they're the ones that are affected. And I think that it's really important to work with those communities, listen to them, and let them take lead.
Yeah, really well said. I think that's like exactly like you touched on the point. I mean, all these underrepresented communities that have decisions made for them, even though it tends to impact them the most. So I think to what a lot of you were saying about, the intention behind engaging different communities should be sincere. The intention should actually be to, listen and keep an open mind. So be how you were saying, like, if you're wanting to have a conversation with someone, don't go into it with a closed mind. You should go into it with an open mind if that truly is the intention. And then, just coming from a point where you genuinely want to learn what people have to say and, the issues that they're going through from their perspective. So, really, really well said there. And then also, Alex, how you were mentioning building these alliances with people who have different skill sets from you. So it is easy to continue just having conversations with the same, groups of people who are like-minded. They have the same ideas, but just also just looking beyond that and, building on leaning into the community for different skill sets as well. So, yeah, really great points there. Did anyone have any, questions from the for the panelists, or anyone wanted to jump in with any more comments before we move on? Mhm. If not, I will read out our last question here, which is, what is an environmental win that makes you proud of doing this work?
I can go. So something that really brings me pride in this work, it can't really be quantified by one project or achievement. I think it's the beginning of a paradigm shift where environmental protection, the rights of underrepresented communities, and climate justice are all woven together, and it just grows. And in the realm of Indigenous led governance, conservation, and climate governance, I see increasing respect and implementation of Indigenous rights and relationships with the land. I would say that's a lot to do with a lot of international declarations that are being implemented. Obviously, there's still a lot of work to still be done, But then I love to celebrate recent wins like Sauble Beach in Ontario, was just given back to Saugeen First Nation and renamed. So that was really exciting. Indigenous communities in Alberta and BC were able to actually practice traditional harvesting in Banff last year. And I was working at Parks Canada when that happened. It was really exciting. And Indigenous protected and conserved areas, which are my main passion, are receiving a lot more recognition and funding opportunities, although not all, but it's a work in progress. And I think that that just really brings pride and hope for the relationships between humans and the land, and that it can be restored and we can protect it for future generations.
For me, one really big win would have been back in June of 2023 with the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. It was amended back then to mandate the federal government in line with what a lot of international declarations have already kind of mandated other nations, and 80% of United Nations members at that time had already agreed to. But it mandated the government to consider the impacts of the environment when regulating things like pollutants and toxic substances. It's such an important step in starting the conversation about how, hey, industry versus human health, about the environment and otherwise, that wasn't necessarily being had in our country before then. So that's something that really, really excites me. Other things are like Bill C 2, 226, which is kind of more about environmental racism and environmental justice. That's a bill that was passed that hopefully should lead to some really, really exciting work that continues to, propel us forward.
I guess for me, it wouldn't be like one win. I think it's tied into another. But in the time, like in the past year or so, since I started my company, we've been able to save over 40,000 glass bottles, which I think relates to about saving 7,200 kilotons of emissions. And while all of that was pretty good, and it's like a hard metric that our entire team was pretty happy about. 2 weeks ago, I was just on campus and having dinner with a friend of mine where these two random girls, like, they just approached me and they said, "Hey, like, are you up here?" I was like, "Yes." "Did you start Mosa?" And I was like, "Yeah." And like, "We heard you speak at some event and it really inspired us to start our own sustainability startup. Can we come and like maybe meet you for coffee sometime and get your thoughts on how we should put this forward?" I think like the reason that was kind of big for me is because every time when when we started this, like the idea was not so much so to really make money and be like, yeah, like this is all great, we're financially doing pretty well. It was actually to make a tangible change. And apart from seeing just a tangible change in the product that we were selling, now that we've got people who are coming to us and saying that we are like are starting to follow your lead or we're being inspired by you, was a pretty amazing win in my head. But yeah.
I very much agree with what's been said about it's often hard to kind of like have one event or one win because it feels like much of this builds upon itself. Uh, Not just one's own work, but the work of others. That there's certainly there's complementary policy initiatives, there's policy initiatives that build on others that came before you. Um, for me, I'll talk about one other aspect of climate justice that hasn't come up yet, which is I think that people very much need to be motivated uh, towards adoption of climate change policies. Uh, and an aspect of that is ensuring industry transition, that people who are in industries that are going to become increasingly obsolete or might be affected by incentive programs or regulations have an opportunity to move towards a new career. Likewise, and on the yeah, or AI, where we hopefully can put people in positions where they're able um, to work towards climate change policy rather than feeling like policy is working against them. Um, the climate justice piece of this is, like I said before, environmentalism is in an interesting space, in that many people working in this environment are working as volunteers or in understaffed or underpaid positions. And so there's the policy around wildfire fighters and their fair and equitable pay, especially the examples coming out of California around folks who are working out of the prison system for far less than Cal Fire folks make. And we're putting people on the front lines of the climate emergency in these understaffed and underpaid roles in a manner that is unjust for the dangers of the specific event and the overall severity of climate change as an issue. The one specific event for me that's applicable in Canada is several years ago, 3 or 4 now. We challenged how a local contract from a municipality made it so that people who were previously arrested or incarcerated couldn't work on these government contracts. However, people were trained in the penitentiary system in order to take those jobs. So we've provided an opportunity for training, and then once people are out, don't have a means to actually do the work based on those human rights violations in the contracts. And so that's something we challenged and had removed. That felt like a big win. I checked on it today; it's back, so it's something that we'll have to reinvigorate on. But at least for a few years, we had that push forward. And so for me, the climate justice issue is, as everyone has talked about, it's the age issues, the generational climate injustices, the spatial climate injustices, the recognitional issues and procedural issues of who's involved and who's heard at the table. But then also these kind of more, I would say, under-addressed. All the issues remain under-addressed, but kind of these specific areas that we can find ourselves in of climate policy, that we're able to make a difference, particularly when it feels like we're in kind of against this insurmountable wall of policy that often feels hard to change, but can sometimes be done with a few phone calls or a few letters. And that was the case in this, was that it took a few phone calls to the Human Rights Tribunal to have that contract resolved and provide an opportunity for people to seek gainful employment in a climate change focused role. So.
Yeah, that's a great point, and something I think that doesn't always come to everybody's mind, these impacts of environmental racism, and just how, these spaces, they need a lot more regulation, and those aren't the things that are at the forefront of some of the conversations that we're having in, the climate action space. But it's definitely important to address these. And yeah, I'll be like incredible. Like it must feel so incredible to not only have that hard metric of success, but to have someone actually come up and be inspired by your work. That's definitely the kind of win that's just like we would love to celebrate as a community. So really, really well done there. And Elena and Chetan, how you were talking about, these acts and bills that have been passed, and how these kind of international regulations and policy changes, those are the ones that make these trickle down effects actually in practice. And it contributes to this like culture of change. It contributes to, better understanding and just people at the community level being more open-minded to, looking at different perspectives, such as Indigenous perspectives, and recognizing, traditional ways of knowledge that have always been there, and just seeing that as being incorporated in climate action. So really, really amazing responses there. That was our last question, but I did want to check and see, if there's anything you'd like to build on, or any comments that you'd like to build on, or any other questions that you had, for each other as well as you're working in this space, about policy, climate action, and activism.
Um, I'll kind of give a broad comment, which is that many years ago, 60 or 70 years ago now, there's a quote from Tommy Douglas, which was that someone with a conscience is going to take principled positions and put them into place through legislation. And I think the climate policy avenue is often one that again seems like an insurmountable issue, or seems like something that's very hard to um, get a foot in the door, and then also you know create meaningful change and visible change. And to some extent, it can feel like you're dreaming in Technicolor, but that's the best way to dream. And if you set your sights on something that has long-term generational change, that's an opportunity that you'll leave a lasting positive impact on not just your community, but the environment at large.
Amazing, Alex. Sounds amazing. Yeah, anyone else want to add their final thoughts to this conversation?
I'll just say that when you're thinking about the big problems that society faces, nothing is ever going to solve everything. There's no magic switch we can flip to make everything better all at once. And there's so many different ways, or so many different ways to make an impact. It's almost overwhelming to think that everything that you could possibly do in terms of pushing the climate agenda forward, in terms of advocating, it matters. Everything you can do matters. And that's a really inspirational and a really hopeful place to be. So I hope folks remember that. Everything they do matters.
I love that. Thank you so much. Anyone else?
Can't top that, sorry.
Yeah, that was incredible. Yeah, really, really great big thank you to all of you for your thoughts. And I think that's a great place for us to land as well. Just remembering that, every action that you do matters and anything you can do is important and it matters and it's valued. So like super hopeful note to end on actually. So thank you all to the four of you for being here today and being our panelists. And if there are any additional questions, feel free to, send us an email and connect with us through our Starfish newsletter and our website. And as you leave the Zoom session today, you'll also be prompted to answer a quick survey. So please take a couple of minutes to give us your feedback if you have the time. And with that, I'll close our session. So thank you so much again, once again, and have a great night, everyone.